Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Future Cooperation podcast. Today we have Fadhel Kaboub, and he is this brilliant economist and activist who has really this fascinating perspective of how, especially Africa and other global South countries, can really use this moment to take advantage of some of the geopolitical complexities and turmoil to finally progress, especially in terms of technology transfer. So I really hope you enjoy this interview and tell us what you think about it. Let's start. So I'm really pleased to be joined today by Fadhel Kaboub. Fadhel is an economist working at the heart of some of the biggest questions we're facing, from climate finance to the future development and the global economic system. He's president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity, teaches economics at Denison University, and advised at the highest levels, including with the United Nations. But more than that, and I've met him quite a few times now, he's been one of the clearest voices pushing for a rethink of how the global economy works and how we see it, especially from a global South perspective. So, Fadhel, it's really great to have you with us. Before we get into the big issues that I want to talk about with you, I just want to ask kind of if you could give us an idea of who you are. What are the things, or what was the moment that most shaped how you think about the global economy, and what has shaped the way that you consider yourself within this ecosystem? You know, what your role is in this ecosystem of people trying to do something about it.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to have this conversation with you. I would say it wasn't a particular moment. It was an evolution as part of my education as an economist in university, but eventually as a young professional economist and academic working in this space. I'll start with my education because I went to university in Tunisia. I studied economics, specialized in money and banking. Tunisia, as you know, is a former French colony. The educational system is very much influenced by the French educational system. The legacy of that tradition is alive and well. But later I discovered there's not just French, it's actually more of the American educational paradigm when it comes to economics that's infused into every single course that every student across the world is trained in the same tradition, more or less, the mainstream dominant tradition. And in those 4 years, I learned so much about the US economy, the Japanese economy, the European economy, and so little about the Tunisian economy itself. Almost nothing. And essentially zero training or background or knowledge about the global South, about Africa, about Latin America, about China, about Asia. Nothing. It was just not part of the education. And as you know, the mainstream training of the economics profession leads to this dominant paradigm that says countries should specialize in what they do best. And it looks like developing countries are pretty good at extracting cheap raw materials, and developed countries are pretty good at manufacturing, finished products and technologies and innovating. So that's how we should
Not
organize the
anymore.
world. We specialize in what we do best, and that basically reproduces the colonial hierarchy. But as a student, you look at this and it feels uncomfortable, but then it's science, right? This is what all the textbooks, all the PhD economists, the Nobel laureates tell you. This is how the world is organized. So it doesn't sit well, but you're convinced that I guess this is the way it is. And then the conclusion that you're always pushed towards is that, well, the reason things are really, really bad in the global South is not the economic model. It's because there's corruption. It's because there's inefficiencies. It's because the political system is not democratic. It's because of all kinds of institutional failures to blame on developing countries themselves. So if they can just, get their act together and follow these principles, then everything will go well, right? And so as you move forward in your education and as a professional economist, I had the opportunity to pursue graduate studies in the US at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, which is one of the major hubs for heterodox economics, alternative thinking. And that's where you start reading the alternative literature. You start discovering that there's a different way of thinking about the economy, an interdisciplinary way, a critical perspective from a Keynesian, from a Marxist, from a feminist perspective, from an ecological perspective, that there's a whole other way of thinking about the economic disciplines. But then you also realize that even there's still a dominant global north narrative, because even the heterodox tradition that's taught in most PhD programs are still focused on the work of American and British and European heterodox economists, with a little bit of the input from the Latin American, development tradition and so on. So you feel like there's a huge territory of untouched subjects that need a global South perspective, and that's what led me and quite a few other graduate students in my generation to kind of eagerly move into that space and kind of learn as we go and develop ideas as we go, not by dismissing the heterodox tradition, but by adapting it and strengthening that knowledge base intellectually. And then in more recent years, I had the opportunity to actually take some time off from teaching after many years of teaching, and to move full time into the policy space. I actually took time off from teaching for
Yeah.
2 years. And that's when I fully immersed myself into the policy and advocacy space, from not as an economist coming to teach kind of the technical kind of models of how to do things, but by engaging people who are not economists, who are policymakers, who want concrete pathways towards better ways of dealing with climate, with energy, with debt, with development. And it's really a process of shifting the narrative, of decolonizing the mind.
What I'm interested in is,
Yeah.
why is it that, I mean, what you're saying is that even in universities across the global South, the dominant global North paradigm is being taught. And you're implying that most people that are learning are buying that paradigm. But somehow you have, and many others indeed, have kind of emerged from that and kind of have a critical approach. What is it that kind of, means that some people get this critical approach, whereas others seem, or have seemed for quite a long time, just to imbibe it for wholesale? Not just in the global North, but across the global South. And I do think that's changing. And that's one of the things I want to talk to you about. And the kind of the end of, it seems to me, the era of neoliberalism that's dominated our professional lives. It feels like academically that's over, but it may not be over in reality.
Well, actually, in academia, neoliberalism is far from being over. It still dominates the entire economics profession in the global North and in the global South. Now, it's much better these days in terms of students and even young faculty members who are, you can't really blame them because they've been trained in the same mainstream tradition. Because of the access to information via the internet, via social media even, a conversation like this will reach people who have been trained in the mainstream perspective, and will start, thinking, well, it looks like there's another way to think about it. So they'll start looking online at some things that have been written, some presentations, some summer programs that have been taught and recorded on YouTube, and they'll start discovering that there's a different way to think about it. But the curriculum itself, the traditional curriculum that's locked in, it's still dominated by neoclassical economics, by the neoliberal free market ideology.
With the rise of China and other countries in the global South, and I guess especially since the late 2000s with the financial crisis in the West, all across Africa, people started to question even more the Washington consensus and started to look a little bit more famously at the Beijing consensus, or at least to, as you've been saying, like question some of these things that were handed down as fact, as kind of scientific fact about economics. So So that's just like one of the things that has shifted since the rise of the South. Do you agree that the South is rising? And do you think that not only in terms of, and I wasn't planning for this whole discussion to be about academia, but we can talk about academia, but also in the policy space and in the politics space. Like I've talked to you a lot about this, and it feels to me that you think that now is a very different time to 20 years ago or 40 years ago in terms of the power of the global South to resist the domination, both in terms of academic domination, but also in terms of other more kind of material domination, and actually to forge a possibility from this very complex and risky global scenario.
Well, actually, to get to the heart of this conversation, this particular question, we have to go back to the early days of independence and the African continent, the majority of the global South. That is the late 60s, early 1970s, when the global majority, the global South, was finally moving out of the colonial era, and the public discourse and the dominant conversation was about the unfinished business of decolonizing the global South was structural decolonization of the economy, of the international trade and finance and international taxation architecture. And those are the conversations of the 1970s about a new international economic order. And those conversations were not just theoretical. They were in the policy space. They were in the UN. They were at the national level. It involved academics and policy people and civil society. It was a major goal for the global South. And those conversations were very quickly silenced and made to disappear by the late 70s, early 1980s, until this moment, I would say. In the last few years, we finally see the return of the conversation about a new international economic order. And the reason I say this is because when you look at the colonial era and the international system in which we still live today, the UN system, the World Bank, the IMF, the WTO, the OECD controlling the international taxation system, this global economic architecture was literally created during colonial times. The UN itself was created when the African continent was still colonized. So we're talking about a global system from a global South perspective that was not designed by us. It was not designed for us. So why do we expect it to deliver justice for us? And to be more precise about the economics of it, because that's really the crux of the matter today. When you look at the colonial design, it imposed a particular set of functions on the colonies, on the global South. Three things. Number one, the colonies were supposed to produce cheap raw materials for the industrialized world. We still do that to this day. Number two, the colonies are supposed to be the consumers, not the producers, the consumers of industrial output and technologies from the global north and the large global south market. And we still do that to this day. And number three, most importantly, we're supposed to be the place where obsolete technologies, assembly line manufacturing that is no longer needed in the industrialized world is outsourced to us under the guise of development and cooperation and partnership. But effectively, what it does is that it locks you permanently at the bottom of the hierarchy, at the bottom of the global value chain. And we still play that function to this day.
I guess my question is, like that that attempt in the 70s at a new international economic order to try to break out of the constraints that you're describing clearly failed, right? And then we entered the 80s and 90s, which was really the heyday and the dominance of a kind of a new colonialism, a neoliberal economic colonialism. And I guess my question to you is, do you feel like now, as the discussions are the same of the possibility of a new way of doing things, do you feel like the political context is so different that this time it might actually lead to something significant?
I completely agree with that. Not only the political context, but the international economic context, the technological context, the global South, um, geopolitical potential is much, much better positioned today to create a new international economic order, because a new international economic order is not going to be created by the European Union or by the US or by Canada for that matter, or by China, right? The global new international economic order can only be created by the global majority, by the global South leadership.
So, what's your take on Carney's speech then? You're not impressed by you're not impressed by Carney's speech at the WEF, his conversion to different perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, Carney's speech was useful in a sense because he literally exposed, as the Americans say, the dirty laundry of the global North. He basically said we've been abusing the rest of the world for decades, and we the smaller powers attached to the United States and its dominant position in the global system, basically like barnacles attached to the ship of the United States empire. We've been complicit in doing all of this.
So I think I do want to come on to some of the risks later on, because I don't want us to kind of just think this is a moment of opportunity. Clearly, it's also a moment of peril. Always is to some extent. But there are a lot of people that are saying, given what's happening in the US, to some extent in Europe, even the Chinese, like Africa is going to suffer again in a context of geopolitical turmoil. Your view is that Africa is in a position to really manage this very differently and actually to gain industrially and to try to break out of those constraints that you've talked about, whether it comes to, I know you've talked about energy and food and other goods. So can you take us through why you think that this time it could be different, and that Africa, and not just, I know it's not just Africa, you're just focused on Africa, but it's the same for Latin America, it's the same for parts of Asia, could really emerge from this much stronger than they ever have before?
So you mentioned food and energy and industrial policy, and the reason why I prioritize those sectors is because those are the structural deficiencies that we have in the global South in general: energy deficits, food deficits, and high value-added manufacturing deficits. We tend to be the assembly line, platform with low value-added content. So the source of external debt, which is these three key sectors, is also coincidentally the source of the potential solution, because strategic investments in food sovereignty are not only a climate solution, but also a debt and economic transformation solution. Strategic investments in renewable energy infrastructure is not only a debt solution, but also a climate and development solution. And strategic investments in green industrialization, real industrialization, not assembly line manufacturing, is the true form of structural decolonization that happens to be also a climate solution and a debt solution and structural transformation. So those are the pillars of action. The question is, how do we organize as blocks of global South countries to produce that structural decolonization and transformation? I'll focus on industrialization because that's the key pillar here. No country in the global South, unless you're the size of China or India, no country can industrialize alone. The economics of it just doesn't work, because to industrialize, you need the economies of scale, which means you need to have large volume of production. And for a country like mine, Tunisia, you have 11 million consumers internally. You can't industrialize. If you attempt to industrialize at that scale, you end up manufacturing a small component in somebody else's industrial policy. So you're locked at the bottom of the hierarchy. That's the status quo. But the advantage of regional economic blocks or continental economic blocks or global South partnerships is that not only you have the complementarity of resources and capabilities, but you also have the economies of scale for real industrial policies. And with that, you also have, in the African continent, you have the youngest labor force on the planet. And over time, the African continent, by the end of this century, will be the largest market on the planet, 4 billion consumers, just Africa alone. Now, add to this Latin America and parts of Asia, You have the global majority essentially with all of this potential. Now, what's missing is a couple of things. One is political leadership that understands that South-South cooperation is not just nice, fluffy diplomatic, niceties, as they say, to take pictures on red carpets. It's a survival strategy. It's true structural transformation, and that's one of the first obstacles: is heads of states recognizing that they need to coordinate and activate joint industrial policies. The second obstacle, which is the more technical and financial one, is access to the manufacturing technologies. And I call them often the life-saving technologies, because we want to start with the key sectors of structural deficiency. So the technology to manufacture and deploy renewable energy infrastructure, clean cooking infrastructure, clean transportation infrastructure to build the logistics of development and prosperity. The global south is home to all the critical minerals that are the lifeblood of the economy of the future, whether it's renewables or high tech or even military technology.
I hear a lot about the problems of access to technology, and it's not just it's in health as well, a huge issue. So what is it that could make technology become available to the African continent?
Well, we talked about the rules of the existing international system, the rules of the WTO that prevent the transfer of technology, the sharing of technology, intellectual property rights protections that limit access to the manufacturing technology. And it's often the red line in negotiations, climate negotiations, trade negotiations, debt negotiations. And it's not a technical detail, it's a geopolitical red line. And I'll give you one example and one anecdote out of many to illustrate why this blockage of the transfer of technology is not a joke. It's a serious thing. The first one is a report from IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, from 2002, I believe, or 2001. We can put it in the show notes. That basically said the African continent, within 15 years, can produce 1,000 times its anticipated energy needs from renewables, existing technologies, not new innovations, and can completely replace all the fossil fuel exports from the continent. 1,000 times. That's the potential renewable energy production of the African continent. And yet, the African continent today attracts about 1% of global financing that goes to renewables, and the African continent is denied access to the manufacturing technology to unleash this renewable energy potential, to use its own green minerals to manufacture and deploy this technology. And here's why. And I'll give you one anecdote, one of many, and people can look into it and understand what I'm talking about. Because what we see here as a tremendous opportunity, isn't it? For transforming the global energy system, for decarbonization, for transformation, all the good things are a wonderful opportunity. The global north sees it as a threat, as a geopolitical threat, because unleashing this potential for the African continent alone of real industrialization and development, becoming a global energy powerhouse, means you're disrupting the existing economic and geopolitical hierarchy. And you hear it off the record in Global North conversations with senior officials who completely understand this.
It's a super challenging perspective, and I guess, and it may have been a conversation with you. I can't remember who it was with, but talking about the rise of China in the last 20 years and how that's what happens when countries, huge countries in this case, develop. They become rivals. And throughout my career working in quotes international development, that's precisely what we've been working towards. Like, that's precisely what we've been wanting. We've been wanting to help countries and regions do a lot better and eventually compete, why not, with the countries and regions that have been super successful in the last 150 years. But when that happens, you have massive geopolitical turmoil, and that's of course what's happening now, the rise of China. And were that to happen in Africa, what you're saying is you'd effectively have another China. Are those of us working in the international development sector unaware of this huge kind of contradiction, which is we think we're working with global north governments to um, support the quotes development. I'm sorry, I always put quotes around development because I find the word so annoying. But the development of the global south, when in reality, that's not what people really want to achieve.
Yeah, I mean the contradictions are obvious because when you think of partnership with the global north, or even aid and moving from aid to trade and development finance and all of that, is none of it is designed to create real alternative industrial policies that will compete with global north industries. The vast majority of partnerships is we, the global north, have this market, have this industry, and we have some potential opportunities for you in the global south to outsource some of the manufacturing on our terms. And you do the de-risking, you give us the fiscal advantages, and you do things, according to our norms. So you become a producer of, a participant in our industrial policy. But from a global south perspective, from that one country perspective, it looks like a lot of factories that are creating a lot of jobs and lots of containers going back and forth. And it looks like, progress and industrial development when it's not.
You set out a context in
Okay.
which it is
Sure.
not in the interests of the global north to actually support the genuine progress and development of the global south.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it seems to me that either there's just a constant struggle against the interests of the global north, or one could try to make it in the interests of parts of the global
Yeah.
north. So let's get on to kind of what
Yes.
your strategy is, because I know you've thought this through a lot. Given this, how does one get to a situation
Mhm.
where actually the African continent is able to achieve, to demand
Mhm.
a removal of the constraints that bind it, and allow it to really grow?
Absolutely. So the question of transfer of technology, the country that's most likely to be willing to share technology with the global south today is China. It's not Europe, it's not the
Yeah.
US, it's not Japan or any other bloc. But there's a way to create a new process, to trigger a new process by which Europe in particular would be compelled to share technology on a win-win scenario that will be much better than Europe dropping to the bottom of the global hierarchy and becoming the isolated global minority. And I use Europe in particular as an example here, not randomly, because Europe, to be realistic today, Europe is a poor continent. It has no strategic resources to speak of. It has the demographic trajectory of the European continent, Western European region, is declining. Europe has no energy resources to speak of, but Europe has a small window of opportunity because of its research and development capabilities, because of its industries that are really struggling. It has a small window of opportunities to pivot, right? And unfortunately, at the current moment, the main kind of political leadership of the European Union in particular is still living in this delusional colonial paradigm in which the survival strategy of Europe today is to double down on its tentacles in the African continent, to continue the extraction and to continue surviving via its access to the African continent in particular. And that era is coming to an end, whether the Europeans like it or not. Here I'm talking about European political leaders, not the rest of the continent, of course. So here's the process that I've sort of put forward as a way to create this new multipolar world and to force the transfer of technology, the sharing of technology under a win-win scenario for Europe, for the US, for China, for the global south in general. Imagine the global south creating an economic bloc without China first, a block of 20, 30, 40 countries from across the global south that has the economies of scale to industrialize, that has the complementarity of resources and capabilities, and has the political commitment, which is important, of the leadership to actually do this as a partnership on new terms, right? Terms that are pre-negotiated within that block in terms of distribution of the value chain, in terms of ownership structure, in terms of protection of biodiversity, labor rights, human rights, frontline communities, and so on. Imagine we've co-designed that vision. And now we're lacking one component, which is the technology to manufacture and deploy, let's say, solar panels at scale within that block. The technology is available in China and Europe and the US and Japan, everywhere. But as we just discussed, there's that transfer of technology is missing. So this is where that block can go into what I call the geopolitical bargain of the century and offer China first, and I insist on China first, this bargain of the century and say, look, if you share your technology, in-kind transfer of technology and partnership to unleash this industrialization potential on our terms, here's what we give you in return. In 10 to 15 years, you double your industrial footprint, you double your geopolitical weight globally, and you secure your access to these precious minerals that everybody's panicking about. In addition to that, because we are the global majority, the largest market on the planet in the next few decades, we give you privileged access to our market. I guarantee you China will take the bargain immediately with a little bit of negotiation. Of course, I'm skipping some details here. The idea here is not to position China at the top of the global hierarchy, but rather to trigger a process that then allows that global south bloc to go to European countries and say, look, we offer you exactly the same bargain we offer to China. If you agree to share your technology to manufacture and deploy geothermal technology in the global south on our terms, to manufacture high-speed rail technology on our terms, and you make a long list of the building blocks of development and prosperity that you want and all the transfer of technology that you want, and offer it to the US, to Japan, to Australia, to France, to Germany, to Spain. At that point, every single country in the global north will immediately understand that if they pass on the opportunity for that partnership, they know that ultimately we can go back to China for high-speed rail technology, for wind turbine technology, for pharmaceutical technology, and allow China to double, triple, quadruple their economic and geopolitical weight.
So in your analysis, because this is what you focused on, the main thing holding back the global south or African countries or groups is the access to technology. It's the lack of technology. You haven't focused on the finance or the lack of it. You haven't focused on trade barriers. So in a lot of work that we're doing, we're looking at the barriers to industrial policy, and it's trade and it's finance is the one that people always go to. But you're focusing on technology, and your particular plan is a way to sort out that technology barrier.
Absolutely, because what I just described is a $0 joint industrial policy. There is no need for external financing because normally, when you have a joint industrial policy of this kind, every country pays its labor with its domestic currency. You don't need dollars, external financing for that. Every country pays for its raw materials and its national currency. You don't need dollars for that. But you normally need dollars in order to import the manufacturing technology to start the process. And once you do that, you're locked into a debt trap. The cost of finance is too high. The lenders will insist that you manufacture things that you can export so you can generate dollars to pay them back. And therefore, you neglect the building blocks of your development. You never actually build your infrastructure. You become a manufacturer for the rest of the world.
I love this, Fadhel. And what you're setting out, what you call the bargain of the century, is your assessment of how this time around, as the kind of geopolitics of the North plus China is kind of playing out in this trade conflict and sometimes violent conflict, the countries of the global South are going to be able to position themselves to actually take advantage of the turmoil and the competition rather than be subject to the actually the violence that it caused last time around or many times around. I guess my question to you is this, Fadhel.
If I may,
Yeah.
if I may if I may add one more thing here, because what I just described, this massive structural transformation of the global economy, this has never been done in the history of the world. Because what we're doing is lifting millions and billions of people out of poverty, out of hunger, out of socioeconomic exclusion, transforming the world economy. And we're doing this without inflicting revenge on any of the countries that caused these problems historically. We're doing this without invading or colonizing any other nation. We're doing this without throwing our own people under the bus. So, what we're doing is inviting the rest of the world, the global north in particular, to participate in co creating this new international economic order, this truly multipolar system. And that's ultimately the goal if we're serious about peace and prosperity and sustainability.
So, but then answer me this. You've said that it's not in the interests of the global north countries to support progress and development in the global south because of geopolitical
Yeah,
power balances. So
sure.
surely even
Yeah.
despite your proposal, that remains the case. Why would countries start to say, okay, well, we will help the global south to progress, given that inevitably that means because power is zero sum, that the traditionally powerful
Hmm.
countries of the OECD, let's say, become less powerful relatively. I mean, it makes sense for them to continue to try to
Yeah,
maintain their
sure.
power. And that's why, the whole challenge for the West for the next 20 years is to
Yeah,
manage the decline of power wisely rather than to grip onto it. But, that's a separate question. But,
yeah,
why would these countries do that ultimately?
yeah.
You're saying there's a significant economic incentive
Well,
because of the I guess the trade opportunities
yeah.
that emerge.
Well, let me answer your question by reframing it slightly, especially when you look at it from a European perspective. It's not that Europe is going to help unleash this potential. It's actually the other way around. It's Africa and the rest of the global South coming to help Europe survive the next century. As I said earlier, Europe is a poor continent with no resources, no energy resources. The demographic trends are working against it. And its traditional alliances, economic, geopolitical alliances, have been exposed in the last few months. When in this intense competition between the US and China, the US is more than willing to throw Europe under the bus when it comes to US dominance and survival. And we've seen it. And Carney exposed it, and everybody knows, the Europeans themselves know that they're disposable when it comes to this. So, if anything, it's the global South that's coming to the rescue of Europeans and saying, look, we're offering you a true partnership, a survival strategy that's a win win scenario. And it's up to European nations to decide whether they want to leapfrog into the new world or remain locked into the colonial mentality that's clearly not working for them at all. Um, the idea here that the global north will resist this, there might be geopolitical resistance, there might be even violence, to be realistic about the history of how these things have gone in the past. But if we get past through that geopolitical pressure and even security pressure, sanctions of the kind that you've seen against many global South countries. If we get past that, and there are strategies to get past that, then very quickly you'll see internal pressure from the corporate sector within the global North that will start feeling the pain of isolation.
So there's a bunch of political problems in the global north, and I think what we're seeing at the moment. I've recently moved from Colombia to the UK, and what we're seeing at the moment is kind of it's just battling it out, really. Everyone wants some kind of response to the current climate of uncertainty and insecurity that people are living through, especially the working classes in the global north. And it's going to go one or two ways. It's going to go right or left. And it's unclear which one of those are going to be kind of called upon to provide the solution. And let's just hope that I think there are genuinely fears. There should be fears about the turns that Europe could take, that the US already has taken. And there's all of that. There's the global north politics, which is a really, really serious issue. But let's just focus on the global south politics. You've been
Mhm.
out and about. You've said, you're focusing a lot on policy at the moment, which is great. You've recently been in Colombia for a meeting of progressive economists, and there seem to be more and more of these meetings. There was one, wasn't there, in Barcelona last month as well, not just of economists, but of political leaders. And I guess my question to
Yeah.
you is, yes, that these ideas are brewing, and it feels like a group of political leaders are beginning to, or have long ago begun, to kind of build some kind of unified approach, but it still feels quite a long way off. So I guess my question to you is, what are the barriers currently in the global south to politicians and governments actually going ahead and adopting your approach, not only maybe in the world of tech transfer, but also for other things, where basically
Yeah.
joint positions are the best way forward. And you look at Latin America, tragically, that is a continent which has found
Mhm.
it really, really hard to come together, basically for political reasons, party lines, and I guess Africa. There's probably somewhat more hope for some kind of coordinated approach given the African Union.
Well, the main obstacles in the global south, and whether it's Latin America or Africa, is our political leadership, and the politics is really a very poisonous space. First of all, you have short-term election cycles. Think of Colombia; it's 4 years and you're done, right? There's not even a second term, and there's constant pressure internally and externally to align with global North interests. I mean, the elections in Honduras, for example, a few months ago, and the external interference was just the latest high tech version of external interference, kind of in your face. Just a few days after the elections, if you followed the elections in Honduras, 4 million text messages were sent to the poorest people in Honduras, threatening them that if they vote for the progressive candidate, that the remittances that they receive from their family members in the US and the rest of the global north will be blocked. And so we're going to see a lot more of this techno-fascist intervention in elections. And the message is very clear that if you dare challenge the international economic order, we're going to come after you politically internally. I mean, what happened in Venezuela? What happened to international law? What happened to presidential immunity, no matter what the situation is? It means that we can just
So what
kidnap
you on the one
anybody.
hand, Fidel, you're painting a picture of possibility
Yeah.
whereby should countries come together, they can really do much better than has really ever been conceived before, and we could
Mhm.
see, a new era of prosperity in the global south through advanced technology use, etc.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you're now saying it's going to be super, super hard politically.
Uh,
We know that that's kind of a truism, isn't it? But so, what are you hopeful politically? I mean, what could actually get
Yeah.
get us over the line?
What can get us over the line is not speeches, political speeches. It's real action, because all of these obstacles, there are practical strategies to build guardrails, to build protective measures, to build popular support for joint industrial policies. None of this has been done yet. So there are technical blueprints that need to be put into action. Have to also inform, educate, empower, mobilize, organize popular support for this vision, and actually demonstrate that there's a clear pathway to transformation, demonstrate that we're shining a bright light on the threats, on the real obstacles, and that we have practical strategies to circumvent them. And we're moving increasingly into this Palantir world design, right? You've seen their manifesto. right? We're going to interfere everywhere because we have your data. And that's another reason why you need to build your digital sovereignty.
I've spent the last like few years just basically gradually a part of me gradually losing hope about what the future holds, not actually because
Yeah.
of the geopolitics, because I think the
Hmm.
geopolitics, I think you kind of sense this as well, are opening doors that would have remained shut otherwise. And it's also to do with the rise of the global south that's led to the current kind of turmoil that's leading to open doors. So I actually think, yeah, there's a bunch of risks globally, but also there's this bunch of opportunities, some of which you outlined today. But what's been keeping me up at night is absolutely the kind of AI and tech stuff that feels like it's out of our hands and feels like it's the next huge wave to come and dominate our politics, our societies, and you've expressed this. It's really unclear how we have any say about that. So I guess I'm just going to come back to this kind of overarching question that I have for you, and I guess for everyone who comes on this show. I can't work out if you're optimistic or not, Fadhel. I can't, because you set out this optimistic vision, and then you're like setting out all of these immense barriers to the possibility of
Yeah.
that vision ever actually being achieved. So, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, general question, but also specifically, what do we need to see in the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months to make us feel that actually we're progressing to where we want to go and not regressing to the kind of other scenario that you've also been setting out?
Well, to open this up, let me quote the guys on Wall Street who always say, "Hope is a crappy hedge." Right? You can't just go with hope alone. You actually have to have radical hope. You have to have a strategy. You have to have practical steps that you can take to deliver on that hopeful outcome that you have. But you can't just do nothing and hope for the best. So that's the first thing. The next thing is you really have to work on all of these fronts. You can't just focus on the technology and ignore the political interference. You can't focus on the political speeches and the narrative without getting into the technical details of actually how do you structure a joint venture, an ownership structure. You can't do this without the vocational training associations being on board with your industrial policy, because today they train young people for the jobs of that the market is offering, which is assembly line manufacturing, right? So all of these building blocks, it's a system-wide transformation, and that's why it has to be done at the heads of state level, at the cabinet level, to structurally decolonize every single aspect of the economy. So that level of coordination is required at the political level. The technical coordination is becoming increasingly easier to do technically. We do have partners in the global south that have the advanced capabilities, industrial capabilities to plan, to strategize. And it's not just China. It's the Indonesias, it's the Malaysias, it's the Brazils of the world, it's the South Africas of the world. So it's a team effort. It's not just all from China. China allows for the leapfrogging potential. So all of that is available, and the coordination is already happening at the think tank level. We're very close to bringing this at the heads of states level to bring a full scale actual coordination, and then not thinking that you can walk into the lion's den and not be eaten alive, right? Geopolitics is a very, very dangerous game. Industrialization is a very dangerous game. So you have to be fully prepared, not just because of the Palantirs of the world, but because this is a very radical transformation of the system that will be resisted with diplomatic and trade rules and tactics of delays and distractions, the soft kind, but eventually resisted with violence, with interference. And you can't just be naive and not expect that kind of confrontation to happen. Not that we want to see a world of confrontation, but because we know history, right? And we understand, and we can read the speeches that we're hearing today. right? The direct verbal threats,
Nice.
right? They're saying you're not allowed to de-dollarize. Who told you you can do that?
I think you have set out really well the balance between the possibility right now of building towards something truly transformational in the next 10, 20 years, and also the risks we face of going in a totally different
Mhm.
direction if we actually don't manage to, I guess, coordinate and cooperate across the global south and with elements of the global north that, that want that it's in their interest and in their values to want to engage. So that's just been a great interview. I really appreciate that, Fadhel. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. And I guess just to end with any books or reports or podcasts or films that you've seen recently that
Okay.
have really,
Mhm.
made you think in a different way or shifted your perspective on some of these important issues.
Yes. Well, first, thank you for this conversation, for the kind invitation. It's been a pleasure, and I want to close with a realistic note that yes, there's all of this potential, there's all of these risks and obstacles and all of that. But if we don't do nothing, if we don't do anything today, then we've already lost hope. So the idea here is to do our best, and not in a naive way. And even if we fail, we can at least say we tried and we thought hard, and we pass on the baton to the next generation to try better and to try harder. So that's the only option we have. Now, in terms of things to read, I have something new, relatively well, not so new, but newish, and something really old, but really worth reading. So I'll start with the old one, which is a report published by the Doug Hammarskjöld Foundation in Sweden, a report that was presented in a special session at the UN in 1975. And the title of the report is "What Now?" question mark, with the subtitle "Another Development." And I'm happy to share the link so you can put it in the show note. And it's really a large group of global South and global North intellectuals and policy people who sat together for a number of years during that period of the 1960s and 70s, and co-created, co-designed a coherent, comprehensive framework for a new international economic order, for another development. That's why they called it Another Development, meaning after independence. And the title, What Now? Meaning, what do we do now that we've decolonized the global South? It's about the unfinished business that needed to be done. So it's a fantastic report. Everybody should read it, and that really forms the foundation of a lot of my thinking today. The newer book, I guess, to read is Techno-Feudalism by Yanis Varoufakis, which I think is one of the most creative and sharpest critiques of the existing system, especially allows us to pay real close attention to the system as a whole and to the rise of the techno-feudalist or the techno-fascists that are not only controlling our lives as consumers, but controlling the political system increasingly. And as I mentioned earlier, we've seen how that control can be weaponized, like in the elections in Honduras, and we'll continue to see it weaponized everywhere, including in elections in the global north, probably in very insidious ways. So it's a very important reading for people who want to, broaden their political economy thinking. And Giannis is just a fantastic thinker. You should read everything he writes.
Yeah, well, I saw that book and I haven't read it yet. So, yeah, that will prompt me to get hold of it and to read it. Fadel, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. That's caused us to think so much and really new and helpful perspectives at this critical moment. Speak soon, I hope.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks very much for listening. And please do subscribe and get in touch if you have any comments and engage with this podcast in the future. We've got some brilliant guests coming up, some more thought pieces from me, and a new format called Groupthink, where we're going to be discussing the events of the past month with some brilliant thinkers. So, yeah, just stay involved. See you soon.